Hello, we got it. We got it together. Welcome to In Conversation with Jamel Shabazz. This is the first talk in a four-part series, homage to the Black South art and culture appreciation. And we are so glad that you're joining us this evening. So, a couple of things just so we know what's happening. This series will be taking place every Wednesday during Black History Month. So, definitely check out the Gantt Center website for particulars. And I am your host, Yvonne Bynoe. I am the founder of the online platform She Loves Black Art. So a couple of things, please stay to the end because we're going to have a Q&A session where you can ask Jamel some questions. And also I'm going to share with you how you can win a spot in Jamel's virtual masterclass that's taking place on February 19th. So definitely hang in there to the end. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Jamel Shabazz, the wonderful, legendary photographer. Jamel Shabazz is an acclaimed photographer whose work has been shown in numerous solo exhibits in the United States and abroad. His exhibit, Reflections of a People, Photographs from the Archives of Jamel Shabazz, is currently on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. The exhibit spans 40 years of Jamel Shabazz's wonderful and rich chronicling of Black American life. Shabazz is the author of several monographs of his work, including Back in the Days and A Time Before Crack. I am honored really to be here tonight to talk with Jamel. I've been a fan for years. I started my career talking about hip hop, and you can't do that without knowing his work. So again, it spans beyond hip hop. But what I'd like to do is show a couple of images, some of my favorites that have appeared on She Loves Black Art. So if we can show a couple of these slides, I really appreciate it. So this is the first one. This has appeared on, these are the Red Hook brothers. I love the look of it. I love what it stands for. I'm from Brooklyn, just like Jamel is. So these are people that I, definitely can relate to and know what they're about. Can we go to the next slide? This was a phenomenal, just to see these Black fathers. A lot of Mr. Shabazz's work shows Black fathers, which I think is something that we don't see enough of. And that smile on the young boy's face was just, mesmerizing. And then we have one more slide. Oh, I'm sorry. We have two. So here's another beautiful Black father and his children. And then we have one other one right behind it. Yes, Black love. So this is old school love. And again, these two probably are parents by now, but definitely looking at the sheepskin coats and the glasses is really brings back that old school feel. So I just wanted to share some of the things in case you weren't familiar with his work. So we're going to bring Jamel on right now, and we're going to get the conversation started. This is informal, but again, I have some things I really want to touch base on and for the audience. Hi, Jamel, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Yvonne. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to take this opportunity and extend my sincere gratitude to everyone at the Gantt Center for their contributions and not only making reflections of a people possible, but for the work they've been doing over the many, many years. I salute everyone at the Gantt for their contributions, and thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for being here. I mean, everybody is really excited for your participation. So I'm going to jump right in. Since the theme is homage to the Black South, I know that your grandparents were part of the migration, and they're from North Carolina and from Georgia, I believe.
Yes.
So can you tell me in terms of what influence they had over you, your family in general, around photography, art? Like, what influenced you from what you saw them doing or engaging with?
I never had an opportunity to meet my grandparents on my mother's side. I did meet my grandfather, but the greatest influence really came from the traditional photo albums that were passed on from generation to generation. You know, it's through that work that I developed an understanding of where I came from. And I was introduced to the South for the very first time because a lot of those earlier photographs came from both North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia. And it was very important to have that history. And so, you know, as a young child coming of age in Brooklyn back in the days, those albums were always center stage on our coffee table. And I was always fascinated behind that history. My parents didn't know I was looking at those photo albums, but it meant a lot to me to see the old cars and see the dates and just know that somehow I'm connected to those images. And even as time would progress and I would go over other family members' homes, I would see those albums as well. It was something that was always the cornerstone of each household back in the days. Those albums meant everything. If someone passed away, the album went on to the next oldest. So for me as a young person coming of age, before I even picked up the camera, it was just something about those albums that just mesmerized me. And it wanted me to know more about my history and culture and how I can contribute to preserving that legacy.
Definitely. And I'd like to also talk to you a bit about professionally. Who were some of the influences? I know there are quite a few photographers that you cite as key influences to you. Would you share that with the audience?
My greatest influence came from my father, who was a professional photographer. At 17 years old, you know, he left Brooklyn, went into the United States Navy. He served on an aircraft carrier, and he was trained in the Navy School of Photography at that young age. And he had traveled extensively throughout the Mediterranean. So I think that it's his earlier work that really captivated me early on, you know, seeing his images of, he photographed the neighborhood. He actually converted our small Brooklyn apartment into a studio, and he would photograph a lot of the families. And I would see the lights and the various cameras. So early on, I saw the value of photography. And then as time progressed, I started looking at a lot of photography books. And the very first photography book I actually saw was a signed copy of a book entitled Black and White America by a renowned photographer by the name of Leonard Freed. And it's that book that showed me the power of both black and white photography and visual storytelling. And as time progressed, I learned about the work of James Vanderzee, you know, who documented the Harlem Renaissance, and of course, Gordon Parks, and so many others. And you know, some other influences really came from war photographers because I thought they were incredible because they would put themselves in harm's way to document the horrors of war so we could better understand, you know, how tragic that is.
Sure. And we have a couple of slides here of those photographers. So can we start the slides? And if you want to put some commentary behind it, and of course, the famous James Vanderzee.
Yes. What's very interesting about the work of James Vanderzee is that a lot of Southerners that migrated to New York during the early 1900s, many of them were inspired by seeing photographs that James Vanderzee took of Black Harlem. And they saw that Black people were living a very prosperous life for the most part, and inspired them to want to leave the South and come to New York. So this is James Vanderzee's most iconic photograph, the girl in the raccoon coat, which is one of my favorites.
Exactly.
I actually have one in my home that his wife passed on to me. And, you know, it really inspired my photography in terms of posing, you know, and style and fashion. So James Vanderzee had a great influence on my life. I love, you know, just, you know, his studio work and how he made his subjects all dignified. And that's something that stayed with me. And it was a very important part of my creative process, capturing dignity and pride.
Definitely. Then we have another one. So can we go to the next slide, please?
And of course, the great Gordon Parks. You know, I was inspired by Gordon on so many levels, but I think it's really, it's two things. In seeing The Learning Tree, you know, his first movie early on as a teenager, that opened up my eyes to racism and the segregated South, and just some of the hardships that Blacks endured back in that day and time. So that was very instrumental in my young development coming of age. And then it was his book, A Choice of Weapons, that I've read that gave me a gauge into this genius of this young man who taught himself photography at 25 years old and went through a lot of hardships and poverty and struggle. But despite that, he was able to elevate himself and become one of the greatest photographers that ever lived, paving the way for people like myself.
Definitely. And the next slide, please.
And again, the work of Gordon Parks, you know, seeing racism for the first time. So it was important that his work is important because it just exposes for me personally, a world outside of my community. So in seeing these images, I got a sense of what was going on in different places outside of New York City. And I
Definitely.
love how he was able to tell stories through his photographs, and something I wanted to mirror. It's one thing just to see the family standing there, but when you see the sign in the background, colored waiting room, it takes that photograph to another level. So that became a very important process of my work, incorporating different elements so that the viewer could get a greater sense of what's going on.
Next slide, please.
Of course, and this is an incredible photograph right here to know the history of it, what was going on in America at this time during the 1940s. This beautiful woman, her husband was lynched. She was taking care of her grandchildren. Her granddaughter had died. She went through so many hardships coming of age. And Gordon was able to just document this and just showing really like two Americas. And it was going to be one of his most famous photographs, American Gothics. And as I stated earlier, it allowed me to see the importance of just capturing a moment to tell a story.
Definitely. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It actually inspired my new project I'm working on right now called Black in America, where I'm documenting Black African Americans with the American flag in the background. So it's a very important project I've been working on for about 20 years now.
Definitely. Next slide.
And this is a photograph by Leonard Freed. And it opened up his book, Black and White America, actually. And what really caught my eye about this photograph was the fact that at this time, when I was reviewing the book, I had two uncles that were stationed in Germany. So it gave me a little insight to what they might have been experiencing. And what was so amazing about it, years later, I would be pretty much in that same place as an American soldier stationed in Germany. So this image really grabbed me because it just reflected so many of my family members who had served.
Definitely. Next slide, please.
And another Leonard Freed photograph. And it just showed me, this image is really interesting because this was my introduction to Harlem for the first time. As a young child, about 9 years old, when I was going through the book, I had never left my community. I only stayed in Brooklyn. So through the work of Leonard Freed, I was able to time travel and be introduced to other areas outside of Brooklyn. So I vividly remember this photograph being in Harlem, and it was my very first time seeing Harlem in an image form.
Definitely. And we have another one more slide, I believe.
And another photograph by Leonard Freed, and seeing the white only sign for the very first time. I'm 9 years old trying to understand the world around me. And my parents are not really talking to me about what's going on. This is the 1960s, mind you. So you have the war in Vietnam going on, you have the civil rights movement, and I went to private school, but there was never any discussions about segregation and racism. So when I saw the book Black and White America, it opened up my eyes to racism for the first time. Not only the images, but the words that Leonard Freed expressed in his diary about the different things that he was seeing. So as a young child, 8, 9 years old, this is my first time ever seeing a white only sign.
Definitely. So there's some questions. So I don't believe we have any more slides. So we're going to go back to the conversation. And one thing I want to just get the audience to kind of understand, you just kind of touched on it. You came of age in Brooklyn, New York in the 1960s and 70s. Can you give us some background on that? Because I think it's important to understand where you came from in order to understand the photographs that came thereafter.
Yes, I was born and raised in South Brooklyn in a community called Red Hook. It was a public housing area. During that time, the 1960s, pretty much everyone had mothers and fathers, and we all knew each other. It was a great sense of community. Those that didn't have fathers, it was a good chance that they might have died in the war. I would say that the majority of the men were veterans from both the Korean War and World War II. It was really a great sense of community. We had an Olympic-sized pool, Olympic-sized stadium. We had a bakery right in the heart of the community. So on any given day, the neighborhood had a smell of both cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla. So it was, I enjoyed growing up during that time period. And mind you, the war in Vietnam was going on. So I was watching a lot of young men from my community, go both to and from Vietnam. I remember one man in particular, when he died in Vietnam, how that impacted me and made me want to learn more about that war. So it's a very interesting time coming of age during a period of war and unrest. But as a young child, I wasn't really I just was just searching. You know, one of the things that really saved me in my community too, we had a public library. And I spent a lot of time in that library just trying to understand the world around me. And I promised myself when I came of age, I was going to travel and get answers to a lot of these questions I had about war and racism and civil rights in America. You know,
Yep.
so that's pretty much my background coming up in that particular neighborhood.
Now, I think what is interesting in terms of your whole body of work, I think I'm like a lot of people. My introduction were the 1980s photos where everybody was profiling and posing. But your work is bigger than that. As we would say, it's bigger than hip hop. You have a mission, if you will, and you want to use your photography as really a tool for activism, for change. So can you talk about when you came back, from your stint in the military and started taking photographs, what was going on in the back of your mind in terms of what had changed in New York and what you are now wanting to do with your photography?
Well, I was stationed in Germany from 1977 to 1980. And it's really the images that I took pride that helped carry me on during my time over there. You know, I was taking photographs. I started in 1975. So when I went into the military, I brought those photographs with me. And I used to look at them often when I would just feel a need to want to be reminded at home. But I promised myself, once I return back to the States, I will never be without memory. And during my time in Germany, I did a lot of research into Black arts movement. And I started to learn the power of art and culture and its role in educating people. And I wanted to be a part of that process. So when I came home during the summer of 1980, I came home with this determination to reconnect with those within my community and document it at the same time. But what I came home to was very interesting because I came home to a war where a lot of young men that were once friends with each other just a few years earlier were at odds with each other. And a few of my close friends were murdered. And I was troubled behind that. So I realized that I needed to be proactive in the street and I needed to just use my camera to go to different high schools and engage young people about what's going on. I often speak about the song that Marvin Gaye did, What's Happening, Brother. That song is reflective of the frequency in which I was on because I just got back and I wanted to know what was going on. So I used my camera as a sense like a compass to guide me to certain areas. And when I would see young people, I would speak to them. I started off within my local community because I knew a lot of the youth and I wanted to get a sense of what was happening during my time away. And I was trying to use my voice to inspire young people to love and respect one another because, we live in a very critical time and this is not the period to be at war with each other. Around the same time, the AIDS epidemic was on the horizon. So we were contending with that and a lot of senseless violence. And I just felt that I needed to use my voice to be a light. And around that same time, it's very interesting to note that being inspired by the Black arts movement, I made it a point to spend a lot of time in a cultural center, which is pretty much like the name. It's called Urasaso at the East. And I spent a lot of time going there where I was introduced to poetry, photography, and African dance. And that strengthened my understanding of the power of art and how we need to use that as a platform for education and enlightenment. So I would travel throughout the whole of Brooklyn with my camera. Because when I first came home, I had a lot of time on my hands. So I used that to reconnect with the community. So I would travel from different neighborhoods with my camera. And back then you could talk to people freely. They weren't distracted. Despite some of the violence that was going on, I still had the ability to reach people and get a gauge of what was going on. And what people don't understand is that in a lot of my photographs, you might see the photograph, but prior to taking it, there was a conversation that took place. And it might have been an extensive conversation for me trying to understand what was going on. And I would take the image as a form of evidence of the conversation. And then once I would develop the print, I would go back to the schools or the neighbor communities and pass them out as gifts. And that developed friendships with a lot of people once I photographed over the many years.
Now, I want to backtrack a little bit because for people who may not be familiar with the Black arts movement, to a certain extent, it was kind of like the cultural arm of the Black Power movement. So it was about art and culture helping to forward economic and political and social change. What attracted you to that? If you were over in Germany, what even attracted you to the Black arts movement to the extent that you want to study it and then follow through when you came home?
It was a book that I read over in the library. It's called We Speak as Young Black Liberators. And it was in that book of poems that I was introduced to the Black arts movement, not in photographs, but in literature and poetry. And it's there I learned about Sonia Sanchez and Hakimata Booty and Nikki Giovanni. And I saw the power of how poetry could be used as an instrument of upliftment. And it was just something about that that really motivated me. In addition to the music that I was listening to at that time. You know, mind you now, the 70s had a lot of protests and political songs, and I listened to a lot of that because what the computer is to a lot of young people today in Germany and in military bases, it was stereo equipment that we had, and having that music that really fed our soul. So I was introduced to a lot of political music such as Gil Scott-Heron, Marvin Gaye, The Last Poets, and it gave me a greater awareness of what was going on in the world around me and how these artists are using their platform to educate people. So it was both the music and the poetry books that really informed me of the Black arts movement and its role.
Definitely. So one thing that I'm curious about too, and I think it's a little known fact that for many years you were a correction officer on Rikers Island prison. And you and I have talked about it, but I think it's an important element to kind of deepen the understanding of your work. So can you talk a bit more about that, particularly how your day job impacted your photography, whether it's style, whether it was your intention, whether it was, you know, who you decided to talk to?
Yes, Rikers Island is one of the largest jails in the country. And in 1983, I was hired as a correction officer, and I felt it was an assignment that I needed to be on in my life. You know, one of the things I did study in Germany as well, I studied about jail and prison uprisings from Attica to the Long Binh prison riot in Vietnam. So when an assignment came to me, let me just go back a little bit. When I first came home from the military, my father informed me that it was very important to have a foundation. So one way to develop a foundation is to get a city job. At least with that, you can have health benefits and you can retire, you know, in a certain time period. So I applied for a number of city positions, and it so happens that correction called me first. And I looked at it as an assignment. It was something that was very important to me. Prior to becoming a correctional officer, I had a couple of friends that were falsely accused of crimes that they didn't commit, and they spent time on Rikers Island. So they served as my guides, helping me understand that you do in fact have innocent people that are there, and also you have people who might be guilty, but they need guidance. So I went in there with a clear understanding that I have a position to be a light in that environment. And it was an extremely hostile environment and violent during that time period. But I put on my armor guard and I went in there with faith and with an understanding that I'm here for a reason. And what was very interesting about that time period, as I stated earlier, we had the AIDS epidemic, and then the crack epidemic came, and it started to devastate my community. And a lot of the young people I was having conversation with earlier, many of them had fell victim to the system, now as prisoners. And I felt that I needed to work with inside that institution to try to give light to a lot of those young brothers and sisters. Not only those that were incarcerated, but once I established myself, I spent a lot of time educating officers coming in, trying to give them guidance, because it was a very challenging job. I was 23 years old at the time, and I wasn't accustomed to being in such a very violent atmosphere. So I went in there, like I said, with a determination to make a difference. And then I found that in bringing my photographs into the jail, I could use that language of photography to connect with people, both the ones that I knew and then with those that I didn't know. And it was like a magnet. Those images in my portfolio drew a lot of young people to me. And I started to speak to them about the importance of freedom, you know, the importance of not getting caught up in the traps that are out there, you know, because during that time, I have a lot of associates that were doing 25, 30 years. Young men, 16 years old, doing 30 years in prison. And I had to just use my voice to try to engage them as much as I could. Because in reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, I saw that transformation. I saw there was possibility through proper guidance. And I wanted to do that because I went into a place where I was seeing so many people from my community. And it reminds me of really of a slave ship, you know, and it was my first impression when I went in there. And I went by what you call a bullpen. It was an area in which young people are preparing to go to court, and it was packed with Black and brown bodies. And it just devastated me to see all this potential incarcerated. So I would bring in photographs and share them and speak to people about what was going on. And when I would leave the jail, because now the atmosphere is so violent, when I would leave, I had to go find joy and love. So I would bring my camera and I would document love in the street. I would spend time going back into areas and I would talk to young people and tell them, look, I just left Rikers Island. That's not the place to be. Because back in those days, a lot of young men, they felt that by going to Rikers Island, it's like getting a badge of honor. And a lot of them want to experience that because they felt that it would validate them. So I had to work hard to try to convince young men, and that's not the place to be. And with the crack epidemic coming out, the money was so good. I had a lot of friends that were leaving their jobs to sell crack because it was so profitable. So I have to convince them that it's a trap, that you have to be mindful. Take it from a person that was there. So I look at that whole entire journey as something I needed to experience for the 20 years of my life because it really informed my practices. I carried my camera every single day, both in the jail, when I was leaving the jail. I documented my experience, and I helped to save the lives of a lot of young men. What warms my heart today is the fact that through social media, a number of those young men have reached out to me over the past 5 years, writing me these heartfelt letters about how I was able to transform their lives by simply taking time to educate them. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Are we back on? Good, good. So we're going to talk about social media because that's a big piece of the current puzzle here. But also, too, I want to backtrack a little bit because given the times, when you were out in the street with your camera, can you give us, I guess, some perspective on how did you approach people? Because looking at your photos, everybody's smiling, it looks all love, love. But, and again, that was by intention, but people, we're New Yorkers. Sometimes they were probably leery. So what was your approach?
My approach was really just being sincere. Again, working on Rikers Island, seeing all the violence, it devastated me. So when I would leave that institution and go into the streets, my heart was in pain. So when I would approach, the young brothers on the street corner in particular, I would just tell them that, man, I look at you brothers, y'all look like warriors. And, you brothers look great. You know what I mean? And if you don't mind, with all due respect, I would love to get a photograph of you. But let me just tell you a little bit about who I am. And that would develop the trust. And that's the key element. You develop trust. You're going into it sincere. It's not about the photograph for me. The photograph, again, is evidence of the conversation. I want to engage you because that crack was really devastating our community. And I wanted people to know that I have a really deep look into it from my experience working in the jail. But I would explain to them my intentions. I always kept a portfolio with me where I would show them the work. I had a business card to show them that I was legitimate. And I vowed that if you allow me to take your photograph, I will give you a copy of it for no cost. And that was my process for a long time. I strategically placed myself into certain locations that I like to call them nucleuses, like downtown Brooklyn in front of the Albee Square Mall, or on 42nd Street or Delancey Street. I would go to places that a lot of people would patronize, and I was a regular fixture in those areas, and I was just trying to impart knowledge. It wasn't about the photography; it was really about talking to young brothers about the power of photography, considering photography, the importance of getting a good job, and the importance of education. So I used that opportunity to speak about a wide range of things, and that developed the trust. And as time progressed, people start to talk about me. They say, yo, that's Picture Man right there, or that's Jamel, he's a good brother. And then when they would see me giving the photographs for free, people would see that, and that would cause them to gravitate towards me. So I made it a point to make everyone look regal and dignified. The posing became a part of the creative process because oftentimes you might see people that will agree to be photographed, but they don't know what to do. So now you as a photographer, you have to create the scenario, make it fun for them. And that was a very key element too. Not only posing, but make the whole experience fun and make everyone feel special. And I enjoy doing that. Even to see the young father, to say to him, yo, brother, with all due respect, it's a blessing to see young fathers. This photograph is important for me to document because it could be used as a teaching tool to show other photographers. I might see a couple that love each other, and I'll see that love, and I'll approach them and say, brother, sister, with all due respect, man, may I take a photograph of the two of you? It's obvious that you love each other, and I would love to freeze this moment in time and give you a copy of it. So that's why I said I focus on love, because when love is the cornerstone of your work, and you let the subject know that you love them, it opens up, it breaks down that barrier.
Well, I'm going to share this. We were talking about this before we came live in terms of love. The response to the exhibit here in Charlotte has been phenomenal. I saw it yesterday, and as I shared with you, I was overwhelmed. It's us. It's us in all of our glory. It's families. Everybody's there that from the community. Everybody that we recognize is there, and they look good. They look happy. And one of the people who I talked with, she used the word love. She said he captures love. And I thought that was so important because, again, we see all these images all the time that are otherwise. And here in this space, we saw ourselves, as you said, dignified. People talk about respectability politics, but we looked good, we were happy, and we were together. So, how important are those themes to your work?
It's very important that I document the love, but at the same time, I have to capture the pain and hardships too. Because for every image I take of love, it's hardships that I have to show to give that balance. But for me right now, I look at my work as being visual medicine. And during this time of so much negativity and uncertainty, I feel that as an artist, I have to show the love to help with the healing process, because there's a lot of suffering right now. There's a lot of people who are concerned with the future. So now when you see images of love and unity and togetherness, it warms your heart and makes you feel good. And I share images every day in my social media posts, and I receive letters constantly of people telling me that this photograph made my heart smile. I really needed to see this today. So it's very important that I show photographs that represent love, family, unity, brotherhood, sisterhood, faith, and at the same time, I have to show poverty, despair, pain, and struggle. So both those elements is really 50-50 with me. But I go more towards the love when I post, but I got to always come back with something that's going to be provocative to make me think and be more empathetic to those who are less fortunate.
Right, and definitely I understand that, because it's a large body of work, and I don't think there's one exhibit that could particularly capture everything. But in this exhibit, and goodness knows, if you're here in Charlotte, if you're here in North Carolina, definitely check it out. It's going to be here till March 6th, I believe. So for me, when I looked at the photos, what I was struck with was the diversity of Blackness. I think very often when we see these exhibits, even of ourselves, it's one part of us. There were African immigrants, there were military service men and women, policemen, young people, old people, church ladies, Nation of Islam. Everybody was there. And I thought that was so spectacular. I look at a lot of art, I go to a lot of exhibits, but I have to be candid. Rarely do you see the diversity of Blackness. So as a photographer, is that something that you think about, that, or is that just something that has happened organically over your career?
I say it's a combination of things. One of the things that my father stressed to me when I was coming of age as a young photographer was having themes. So that was very key when you have a set theme. So I developed various themes and I focus on them when I would leave my home. And the theme could be fathers and sons. And not only Black fathers and sons, but fathers and sons in general. The military was a very important theme of mine because it allowed me to document a wide range of diversity. So I think that the themes were very instrumental in developing my vision, because I always had them when I stepped out my door. So I was never without a particular focus. I never got to a point where I got as a photographer's block where I didn't know how to shoot. I just didn't want to shoot. I always had my camera on me. But at the same time, I was very inspired by the work of James Vanessy, and I wanted to continue what he did, in terms of capturing the pride and dignity, the parades and things of that nature, because he's gone now and the baton is in my hand and the hands of other photographers. And I felt to have a sense of responsibility to continue that, because that's very important to me. And one of the things I say in my artist statement is that I want to contribute to the preservation of world history and culture. So my community is number one, but I've gone outside of my community to document other communities throughout America and in other communities around the world. So I just want to make my contributions worldwide to document just love in general. Black love is very important, but world love is very important to me as well. So that's important. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. So I want to piggyback and go backwards and talk about social media, because I think that social media, your Facebook page and your Instagram page, I think that we need to emphasize the importance of that even more. Um, Part of what you do is chronicling Black life. So we certainly, there's a broader perspective, but right now when I'm thinking through a lot of the photographs and a lot of the images, they are young Black people and that were photographed, and now it seems like their kids are coming to you. They're seeing these photographs, and now we know the backstory. You had conversations initially when you were taking the photographs of the subjects, whatever they chose to share, what was going on, you knew that. But now we're hearing even more. So can you talk about the power of social media now that a new generation, if you will, is seeing your work?
Yvonne, it is incredible to me. I would have never have imagined that I would get this type of response behind the images I'm sharing. I'm totally stunned because since I came on Instagram, I think in about 5 years ago, I found that in putting these images on the space, it allows me to reconnect with so many people I photograph. Because in certain situations, I might meet a person for about 5 minutes, and then I said I would never see them again. I'm reconnecting now with people that I hadn't seen in over 30, 40 years by simply posting a photograph on social media. And people, they may not be on, somebody might tag them, and then they reach out to me. And it's beyond anything I could have ever imagined, because I have over 140,000 people that follow me, for the lack of a better word. And my work is that some of them are actually on my page looking for their loved ones, looking for pictures of their parents who came of age, looking for pictures of themselves. And every day people write me to tell me things. I posted a picture the other day of a beautiful, matter of fact, it was on my page already. Someone shared it with the subject who's in the photograph. And then he wrote me a letter. It's a picture of a man, of a brother with his queen and his young child. And then he wrote me to tell me that his wife died of cancer. And it blew me away, because you have this beautiful photograph. I took it from afar, one of the rare ones. I'm on the train, I shot it across on the platform, but I would have never imagined, I hadn't seen a couple since I took the photograph. And now for the brother to write me and say that that was my wife and she died of cancer in 2017, it blew me away. He said, we didn't really have any pictures of each other, so this picture means everything to me. So I find that these photographs are helping people with the healing process. And at the same time, they're using these photographs that they find in themselves to show their children. See, I was live back in the days. Look at me, I was in shape. You know what I mean? So, because there wasn't a lot of people taking pictures back then. So they know that I have that resource of images. And if you don't know a person, personally in the photograph, you might identify with the way the trains look. You might identify with the clothing. So many conversations are coming about by my simple posting. And that's what motivates me each day. But what's more important to me is not only trying to reconnect with people I photograph, but using this global language of photography to provoke thought and bring people together in conversation. And I often speak about the impact that W.E.B. Du Bois had on my work with his idea in developing the Negro exhibition in Paris in 1900. And looking at the idea behind that exhibition, using positive images of African Americans and showing those images in Paris at the Paris Expo to break down the negative stereotypes. So now I had people from around the world looking at my page and seeing fathers and mothers, because oftentimes they have had a misconception of Black people in this country. So I understand that. So I try to put images on my page that show the dignity, because you never know who's paying attention to you. And it amazes me when I get letters from Australia from Australia and Belgium and China and Japan, with folks that look at my work and they appreciate what they're seeing. So I absolutely love Instagram for that. And I love to share not only photographs, but I love to share music that's provocative. I like to share statements that inspire hope.
Definitely. And I want to talk a bit more, because at the Gantt exhibit, there is a playlist. And I understand that going forward, your exhibits will all have playlists. So can you talk about why that is important? Why having music as a background to your exhibit matters?
The music component is very important to everything I do, because it puts you on a similar frequency in which I was on at the time of creating those photographs. A lot of my enlightenment came from music back in the days that I mentioned before. Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, Frida Payne, the Supremes. Throughout my life, music was always there, and it educated me. And during my travels, I always had music with me in making images. So I wanted people not only to not only be stimulated visually, but I wanted your ears to be stimulated. I want you to take in what I was feeling, my particular frequency. Every playlist I make is tailor-made for a particular exhibition. So every single song that I put on the playlist for this particular show is close to my heart, and it's reflective of an image in this. I wanted people to take time and just think a little bit, to take it all in, to be on this particular frequency in order to really understand what it's about. Because oftentimes my work is pigeonholed in just hip hop, but I want the viewer to know this a little broader than that. Yes, hip hop plays a major role in a lot of my imagery, but there's also R&B, there's blues, there's gospel. It's a wide range of music that informs that practice. So my objective is to stimulate people as much as I can, both through the images and in the music. And that's important. And hopefully with that, you will take something more away.
And that's an important piece, because I think that when we think about photography, sometimes we kind of look at it as just a nice image. But you really have used the photography in the term that you talked about with visual medicine. So I think that, as we're getting to almost to the Q&A, maybe my final question right now would be, because you have a global audience, you've taken photos around the world, you exhibit around the world. So we have people, as you said, who may not have, a strong grasp of particular communities. So when they look at your photos, what is it that you're wanting people to walk away with, whether it's at the Gantt Center or at another exhibit at another museum, or whether it's your Instagram page? What is it that you want them to feel or understand by looking at your work?
It's a combination of things. One of the things I would hope is that young people will look at the work and be inspired to pick up the camera and say, because of this work, I want to be a photographer, because we need more visual storytellers on deck. And I get that a lot. So I want people to see the beauty of photography, and in hopes that they will be inspired to pick up the camera. And also I want people to understand that photographs are very important. If you have those family photographs, they need to be treasured. They represent seconds of your life. They're very important frozen moments. And I want people to really understand the value of photographs and photographers. And the overall body of work, I want people to see hope and love and pride, and not necessarily pride, but dignity. And I want them to know that it does in fact exist. I met a number of people from other countries that told me through my photographs, it made them want to come to New York, because they thought that New York looked that way. They thought that vibration still existed. And I can't recall the amount of, I can't remember the amount of so many people have came to me to say, I came to New York based off these images, and I was hoping to see all of that. So the main thing, I want people to just be inspired, and feel a great sense of hope and possibility.
I mean, and I think that's a great way to look at it. I think I'm going to squeeze in one more question if I can. And I think, Black Americans in particular embrace photography because it was a way for us to kind of control our own image in the face of, other depictions. So again, you touched on it about photo albums. Any other advice you have, whether the person is a photographer who's watching or not? What should they be doing to hold on and control their image, or at least hold on to the image and keep it within the family?
The history of the family photo album is very important. And I would say to everyone who, if they can, to try to get a hold of those photographs and get copies and create your own family albums or pass on to the next generation. It's very important also that we all become photographers. We have the ability like never before to freeze moments in time and record history through cell phone technology. So through your cell phone now, I would say to people to go to the elders within your family, go to the elders within your community and interview them about the experience coming of age. That oral history is very important to document, but start with your families, even with your parents. I never had an opportunity to speak to my father about his journey in life. So I think about how so much knowledge was just lost. So in this day and time, if you have elders within your family, speak to them about their journey. If they were in World War II, they were in Korea, they came from, they've experienced racism in the South, interview them and record that legacy. and build a legacy of your own, you know, by preserving, taking your photographs and preserving them. We get caught up in JPEGs now. It's nothing wrong with that, but I think we have to go back to the traditional photo album, develop it, and make sure that it's passed on from generations. So we need that right now. And at the same time, it's very important that we connect with the elders within our outside of our family, within the community. It's a wealth of knowledge out there, and we losing so many people. I've lost a lot of people within my immediate circle, and I wish that I could have interviewed them to get their backstory. So in this time of uncertainty, I would say to people, if you have elders within your community, sit and talk to them. Say, if you don't mind, Ms. Johnson, I'm going to talk to you about your experience coming of age. What wisdom can you give me as a young journalist, how I can propel my life? And it'll make all the difference in the world. It's so important that we do that, in addition to just having more conversations with people. Just pick up the phone. I'm just checking on you to see how you're doing. You know, I go back to a very important verse in the Bible. The harvest is ripe, but the labors are few. We need all hands on deck right now. And I strongly believe that the art community is that community that can make a difference. So rather you be a poet, a painter, a photographer, let's get out there and let's use this gift that has been given to us to make a difference in the world, to preserve the history and culture, and try to inspire a great sense of hope.
Wonderful. So we're going to take some questions now. So if we have questions, then I want to see if I can pull them up here on my screen. I'm going to wait for my wonderful folks here to see what we got. 1 second. Okay, it looks like there's one question about do you have a new book out? When will that be released? And can you talk about that?
I'm actually revisiting one of the books I did back in 2005, A Time Before Crack. It's very important that I bring out that conversation again, because our communities were devastated behind the crack epidemic. The first book I did was all right. It had strong imagery, but it was the stories that were missing. So with this new book that I have developed, I've reached out to a number of people who were involved in the crack, you know, who were around during the crack epidemic, both users, dealers, those within the law enforcement community, lawyers, and I had them write, you know, essays in my book to speak about that experience in hopes that their commentary in conjunction to the imagery will shed light on that really horrible epidemic that devastated the lives of so many people. So that book is very close to my heart because, you know, when I came home from the Army, despite some of the violence that was exist within the community, I saw a lot of potential and hope. And then once the crack epidemic came, you know, all I saw was devastation, pain, and hardship. So I just felt the need to just go back and address that issue in hopes that this younger generation can understand why things are the way they are now and what role that crack and mass incarceration played on so many lives back then.
We have another question. Thank you for that. How can we best archive photographs to pass on? So you talked about, you know, everybody's on a JPEG, because I know I have like 1,000 photos on my phone that I'm trying to figure out what to do with. So can you give us some advice about that?
I think it's important to have a scanner to scan images, to get prints, to get photo albums. Of course, we get so accustomed to the JPEGs and having things on our computer. You know, once your computer's gone, you lose all your imagery. So I think we should go back to having traditional photo albums. That's a good start to preserve that physical photograph. You know, have a backup for your computer is very important. Get data to put on the back of that image, you know, to make sure that the stories are preserved. And like I said, you know, go, and now with the cell phone, you could use that to just photograph an image, and now you have a copy of it. So go amongst your family members and get those images so you could build up your body of work, because all too often a family member could die and that album goes to the curb. We may not even know that it exists. So when you go and you visit family, ask them, can I borrow this photograph and get a scan of it and preserve it? So I think this is very important to, again, go back to that traditional photo album and get some prints made. And it's a joy to put together a photo album. I used to watch my father as a young kid with great zeal put together these albums in a particular sequence. And he took pride in it, knowing that this album is going to be a seed that will be passed on and inform the next generation. And I'm very grateful to have a lot of that work. So just start with your own collection, preserve it, get yourself some photo albums, and find a spot online where you can get some classic prints made and just make it a tradition to pass on. And I think that's very key.
Definitely. Now we have another question, and somebody's asking, when are you going to be in Los Angeles? Do you have any upcoming plans, either virtually or in person, to visit Los Angeles?
I don't really, I've actually fallen back on my travels right now. There's a lot of work I need to do. I've been pretty much traveling for the past 40 years. So I'm really tired at this point, and I really need to refocus on home. But I do have an exhibition coming up in Los Angeles, I believe in April. So if the person who asked that question follows me on Instagram, I'll have that advertised. It's going to be a really important exhibition because it's based off a lot of my photographs that I just rediscovered after scanning old negatives from the early 1980s when I was really getting into photography. So it's vintage work that has never been shown before, and that's going to be shown for probably about 2 months in LA. So again, the information will be on my social
Okay,
media feeds to inform you.
great. And I think one other question that I have, I know that you submitted some work, or your work is featured in the new Wedge collection. I can't remember the title, but can you talk about that a bit, that project, because it's about Black photographers around the world. So I think that is something that might be of interest to our audience, to see how your work fits into that whole collection.
Yes, the book is entitled Still We Rise by a good friend of mine, Dr. Kenneth Montague. He's one I met in Toronto. He gave me my first exhibition there a number of years ago, and he collects my work. He's a very noted collector, and he inspired me to become a collector myself. And it's very important that we see the value that, the stock market is not doing good now. So I think that collecting in art is a really good move, because art has a lot of value to it. And Ken has had the genius to see that early on in his life, something he's very passionate about. But my work is in a number of collections right now. Certain people acquire work from me. I like to donate work because I feel that it's a divine, having the ability to see is a divine gift. And what I want to do now is just share that gift with different institutions. So now I know it's being preserved and shared, so that's very important for me. Every opportunity I get, I'm donating work to institutions, because it's bigger than me. It's about preserving my community, for future generations. So I would encourage people to consider collecting as well. If you have a favorite photographer out there, it might be someone up and coming who's doing really important things. Make that investment in that artist. Support art. It's very important, and it's a great investment. And for those artists out there, do consider donating work to institutions, because now you give it a greater life, and that work can come up in future exhibitions.
I'm just trying to read some more so we have two more questions that came in. Have you taken, I just want trying to just make out what they're saying. Oh, somebody was asking, because you had relatives from Georgia, have you thought about perhaps doing a collection of photos going the migration from the north back to the south, since it has been happening quite rapidly in the last, decade or so?
That's a really good question. I don't think I'm going to do it that way, but I am going to rewind, and I'm going back into my family photo collection, and I'm going to bring that back to life, going back into the 1910, 20, 30s. I'm looking at that work right now, which is so viable. I even have photographs from the late 1800s. So I'm going to actually have a number of those works in a book project that I'm developing right now. I want to honor them. And I've actually gone back on family reunions and documented those events, which is very important. But right now, I want to rewind and go back into time and revisit those family photographs and learn more about my family members, in hopes that I could secure their legacy and have it in the book form or even a documentary, because those voices are very important. The current, a lot of people are still around today, but I just think about the hardships that many family members went, especially during the red hot summer, in the early 1900s. So I want to give voice to them and inform people of just doing the same thing. We have to go back into our past in order to understand where we're at right now. So that's a very important project of mine right now. And in revisiting my father's negatives, I'm amazed with so many photographs he has from North Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia. They have never been shown before. So I want to illuminate my father's work in that process too.
Definitely. Now, somebody's asking a question about photos of Blacks and Puerto Ricans. So for the broader group here, you can't see Jamel Shabazz's work and not see Puerto Ricans.
That's
So,
right.
I mean, that's New York. So I really could recommend that you go to his page, go to his Facebook, go to his Instagram, and you will see all of us there,
That's
you
right.
know, in the work. So definitely they're there.
Because I came from a community of Black and Latino, so my work, it's always there. Some of my very first models were actually Puerto Rican and Cuban. Early on, we talk about 1974, 1975. So it's there. It's almost a balance. You know, I take great pride in making sure that they are part of every conversation I do. You know, or should I
Boricuas
say a
y
part of my creative process.
morenas. Yeah, I mean, it's both. So definitely. And I think that, you know, as we're getting closer to the end of this phenomenal conversation, you know, you're still a young man, but we do have to ask about the legacy. So when you think, you know, maybe, you know, 100 years from now, how we look at Derzee, what do you want that next generation of folks that, you know, are somewhat far removed from this time to look at these photos and really think about Jamel Shabazz as the photographer when we're speaking about all these great iconic photographers?
Well, I like people to say that Jamel was one of many, because there's so many great photographers out there. You know, I'm just very fortunate to be where I'm at right now, and I'm very grateful for everyone who's helped me get to this particular point. But I would like to look at my work and say, this is a man that had a profound love for humanity, and he used his divine gift to try to make a difference in his world using his global language of photography. That he really had love for humanity is obvious within his work. If that could be said about me, I've done my job, and my legacy
Really?
is complete.
Well, we still have a couple more minutes here, so I'm going to see, you know, your final word. You know, I'm going to give the floor to you, and then I'll go into some last minute housekeeping. But what is your final word for tonight? We're happy that you were able to make it here. The exhibit is phenomenal. So again, I'm going to push that. If you're here in North Carolina, Charlotte area, come and check out the exhibit in person. But what is the final word you'd like to leave the audience with?
There's so many words that I have right now. You know, one is to support art institutions. There are a number of them right now. You know, and a lot of them are going through very hardships due to the epidemic. You know, COVID. So they're losing funds. So let's support art institutions the best that we can. Support artists, and let us use our various platforms to try to make this world a better place. You know, I stated earlier that the harvest is ripe, but the labors are few. You know, it's a lot of work that needs to be done out there right now. There's a lot of suffering, you know, and so much pain. We all can make a difference. You know, if we sit back and we meditate on what is my purpose in life, and you find that purpose, try to go out there and be proactive and improve your community. And this is sometimes challenging. Start within your own family, these problems. But let's start to rebuild our family. Let's start to rebuild our community, because we are losing a lot right now. And I'm very concerned with the future. But I feel that the only way that we could bring about change in society, if we come together as collective, understand what our purpose is, and going out there and trying to make a difference. You know, we can volunteer, we could donate. It's so much work that needs to be done right now. I believe that we need all hands on deck to make this world a better place, because it's not only America, but there's so many things going on around the globe. So I just call on the global community to, if there's certain issues that concern you, you know, take a proactive position. And use whatever platform you can to address those issues. You know, I think about kids that in foster homes, those who are incarcerated, those who are struggling with alcoholism, those who are contemplating suicide. There's a lot going on right now. Let's pick up the phone more and reach out to people and just see how they're doing. You know, a lot of times we get caught up in texting and emailing, and that's fine. It's a great way of communicating, but you never know what a person's going through. And sometimes you pick up the phone, you can hear that. So let us take time to reach out to people, let them know that we love them and we appreciate them. And again, use whatever gifts that have been given to us to try to make this world a better place during these uncertain times.
Definitely. So it's been a pleasure to talk with you. And this has been a fabulous conversation. And just for everybody who's still here, if you want to win a spot or attempt to win a spot in Jamel's master class, is a virtual class taking place at Saturday, February 19th, you need to like and comment on the YouTube video. Again, like and comment on the YouTube video to be eligible to win a spot in Jamel's masterclass. It's going to be a random drawing, so do that before next Wednesday. So again, check the comment box for more information. And again, Jamel, thank you so much for your time. It has been a fabulous conversation, and we have been blessed to be able to speak with you.
Yes, and I do have another statement I'd like to make once again. I'd like to thank everyone again for their contributions in making this program happen and so many others. I salute each and every one of you for all your hard work and dedication in preserving this historic institution. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and thank everybody who took time out of their busy schedules to tune into this conversation. If you want any more information, you can always DM me on Instagram, and I'll be more than welcome to respond to any other questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Blessings.